For the longest time, I thought that the Apple TV was the de facto best way to consume your local media library at home. I was always under the impression that it supported the widest range of audiovisual codecs, including the highest ones, serving only the most nutritious feeds into my hungry amplifier. I was, of course, wrong. Not only did it not do that, there's been a better way to watch movies at home for a long time now, and apparently it's on par with the holy grail of quality, that is physical media. And it comes in the form of a discontinued $200 Android box that I bought from AliExpress. Color me interested. Or should I say HDR me interested? Wait, HDR me interested? Who wrote this? The device I'm talking about is called the Ugoos AM6B+, a name you will surely not be fed up hearing me recite by the end of this video. Guaranteed. If you've roamed around the home theater space online though, you will likely have come across it at some point or another, and know that it is among the very few devices capable of fully passing through lossless audio, as well as playing back Dolby Vision Profile 7, the arguably peak in quality when it comes to watching movies at home, being matched or surpassed, depending on who you ask, only by physical Blu-ray discs. But this wasn't always the case. You see, the AM6B Plus is by default an Android streamer, running an OS you're likely familiar with. However, it's equipped with a very particular set of skills which were given to it by enthusiastic tinkerers, skills that make it kind of a dream media player. Before we get into the hows of setting this up, as it involves a little tinkering by yourself, we must first understand the complexities of today's formats and the limitations that come with them. Or rather the devices that play them back, namely the Apple TV and the Nvidia Shield, since those are among the most popular choices when it comes to this. One disclaimer beforehand, this video entirely focuses on local media playback via media libraries such as Plex or Jellyfin, so streaming services are excluded. Now, if that sounds like your kind of thing, welcome aboard the HDR choo-choo train. HDR choo-choo train? Like most things in life, I was completely oblivious to the AM6B Plus until I was confronted with a problem that forced me to do something I try to avoid as much as I can: thinking. The problem in question was my aging Apple TV 4K, which started to show signs of wishes to retire after its nearly 9-year tenure. The only direct counterpart I was familiar with was the Nvidia Shield, which is often listed as the direct competitor or superior in this category, again, depending on who you ask. Both are very capable though, but both also have their limits. For example, the latest version of the Apple TV supports HDR10+. The Shield doesn't, but it has something even more enticing instead: full audio pass-through, which is a big selling point if you have a dedicated home theater system like myself that is designed to process these signals and translates them into the high-fidelity recreations we so desire. The Apple TV unfortunately decodes everything internally first and then transmits the audio as a linear PCM signal instead. Now, I'm not an expert at the subject, but I will still attempt to explain the differences, or at least how I understand them. You see, although the Apple TV spits out a bit-perfect recreation of the source material, it does lose all of its specialized audio codec monikers, like Dolby Digital, Atmos, DTS, and so on. Thus, the AV receiver no longer knows what it originally was and is unable to apply any specialized settings or EQing for that specific format. Now, if hearing this is moving one of your eyebrows rather high into the sky, please let me know why in the comments down below. Or send a picture with said raised eyebrow along with your address and the subject, my eyebrows, to cheeseturbulence@gmail.com for some free stickers. Anyway, what I do know is that if I play back something through my Apple TV, I don't get those neat little Dolby and DTS icons on my receiver. Doing it with the Ugoos AM6B Plus, on the other hand, I get all of them icons, which, at least in my brain, triggers the "it's better" switch. The other issue is that linear PCM doesn't understand object-based audio like Dolby Atmos or DTS-X, stripping the data entirely and making my top-firing speakers an even more questionable investment than they already are. Technically speaking though, this isn't always the case. You see, when playing back movies from streaming services, I do get those icons. So what's the difference there? Well, there's actually two things happening. First, streaming services encode movies in Dolby Digital Plus, also known as EAC3, in order to save bandwidth. Second, even though that signal is still converted to linear PCM by the Apple TV, it is then bundled together with additional Atmos data in a new container called Dolby Mat 2.0, which is then sent to your receiver. This version obviously isn't the same as a true Dolby Atmos signal, and definitely not the same as what you get on a Blu-ray disc. Still, it's better than nothing, I suppose. One thing of note though is that Apple did begin adding bitstream audio pass-through in tvOS 26, but it is limited to a certain group of apps for some reason. Moving over from audio to video, the second limitation these streaming boxes have revolves around HDR, or Dolby Vision. Although both the Apple TV and the NVIDIA Shield will play back Dolby Vision in one way or another, they can't play back the highest level of Dolby Vision. I must admit, I had no idea about this. I always thought a movie either had Dolby Vision or it didn't. Turns out there are different profiles, and as far as I understand it, the highest level of it is called Dolby Vision Profile 7 FEL, or Full Enhancement Layer. Let me attempt to explain this. In a nutshell, a Dolby Vision video has multiple layers of data. First is the base layer, or BL, not to be confused with BS, which is what mostly comes out of my mouth. So the BL contains the actual 4K 10-bit HDR10 video. The next layer is called the Reference Processing Unit, or RPU for short. This layer contains the dynamic metadata, essentially telling your TV the brightness and contrast for every single frame that is displayed. This is what makes Dolby Vision, at least that's how I always understood it. But Dolby Vision Profile 7 introduces a third layer called the Enhancement Layer, or EL, and this is where things get a little interesting. It contains a hidden secondary 1080p video which comes in two flavors. The first version is called the Minimum Enhancement Layer, or MEL. In this variant, the secondary video is essentially blank, so nothing actually changes, it's literally the same. The second version is called the Full Enhancement Layer, or FEL, which is the interesting one. Here, the secondary video contains 2 extra bits of data, which turn the base layer 10-bit image into a 12-bit color master, along with repair data to fix compression artifacts and color banding issues. I hope I got all of this correct, but what I do know is that both of our popular streaming boxes aren't capable of playing back this version of Dolby Vision at all. For example, if you play back a movie with something like Infuse on the Apple TV, it won't know what to do with the second and third layer, and falls back to just a base layer, so a 10-bit HDR10 signal, with no dynamic metadata. I found this to be particularly staggering if true. NVIDIA's Shield does a little better. It at least keeps the reference processing unit, and with that the dynamic metadata, so you still get true Dolby Vision, but the enhancement layer is ignored entirely. Now this doesn't sound too bad, but applying the dynamic metadata without the enhancement layer it belongs to can apparently cause flickering and brightness issues with certain titles, with Saving Private Ryan being the most notorious example. All of this paints a rather unsatisfactory picture for the popular choices these days. However, I must admit I never noticed any of this, but then again I was streaming on an Apple TV. Now that I know though, my brain cannot unknow, and thus I refuse to go back after having experienced the full enhancement layer. Alright, it's finally time to talk about why the Ugoos AM6B Plus is so different to the previous two boxes. Simply put, it can do both full audio pass-through and the playback of Dolby Vision Profile 7 in its entirety. The former is rather easily explained. Just like the Shield, it doesn't do anything weird to the audio signal and thus is capable of passing it unchanged to your AV receiver. But when it comes to Dolby Vision, it's a much more interesting story. During its original release, the AM6B Plus was a simple Android streaming box, which neither the Apple TV nor the NVIDIA Shield paid much, if any, attention to. But what they didn't know was that inside this unassuming box was a chip that later unlocked all of the possibilities, the AMLogic S922XJ. The important distinction here is the J at the end. In this version of the chip, AMLogic paid Dolby licensing fees in order to decode Dolby Vision and Dolby Audio on a hardware level. I think at first nobody noticed this, so the capabilities sat dormant for years. But then, the open source community behind CoreELEC took notice, and after a lot of effort, early 2024 finally marked the release of CoreELEC for the Ugoos AM6B Plus. Now, if you've never heard of CoreELEC before, it's a dedicated Linux instance built to run Kodi, an open source media player and manager. It used to go under the name Xbox Media Center, and if you still know about XBMC, I tip my hat to thee. But why is this release such a big deal, you may ask? Well, you see, in modern chipsets, for example the S928X, which is one of the successors to the S922XJ, support for the third layer, the FEL, is absent again, essentially limiting the capabilities of newer models to a level not unlike that what we have on the Apple TV or the Nvidia Shield. Now, why that is a little up in the air, but one prominent theory is that these newer chips were intentionally locked down in order to discourage people from playing back illegally acquired Blu-ray rips. Another explanation, although a little less frisky, is that the newer chips run on a software stack that simply never received the necessary support. The S922XJ on the Ugoos AM6B Plus, on the other hand, was completely unlocked from the get-go to these capabilities, leaving the door wide open to fully decode the secondary 1080p video streams or the full enhancement layer. And that's where CoreELEC comes in again. Running off a custom version tailored to the S922XJ, it unlocked all the capabilities, full audio pass-through and Dolby Vision Profile 7 support, including FEL. With all of this historical explanation out of the way, let's get to how you can actually set this up yourself. The Ugoos AM6B Plus is a little hard to find these days. There are a couple of eBay listings floating around though, which are a little overpriced if you ask me. Normally I wouldn't go this route, but you'll find more reasonable offerings over on AliExpress. Fair warning though, reasonable is a relative term these days. Demand has pushed the price up and I ended up paying over $200 for it, which is a little wild for a box this old. The good news is it arrived pretty fast and the basic setup was just as quick. Since I didn't intend to use the OS it shipped with, I didn't do anything else in here and went straight to the CoreELEC installation. I of course didn't invent any of this, I simply followed a fantastic guide over on the CoreELEC forums, which I've linked down below. The guide begins with downloading the CoreELEC image file, which you can then flash onto a microSD card or a USB stick. I used the former together with Balena Etcher on macOS, as the AM6B Plus has a dedicated slot for it, which makes this whole process a breeze. Before we boot from the card though, there are a couple of additional steps needed. In the written guides, there are two more additional files you need to download. A dovi.ko file which tells the kernel how to handle Dolby Vision Profile 7, and remote.conf, which is meant for the IR remote, which I don't need, but I followed the guide closely anyway. You see, I intended to use my Remote 3 and pair it via Bluetooth, but I think a new contender just arrived in the mail, so I might just switch to that one. But more on this in the next video. Anyway, both of these files need to be copied onto the root directory of the CoreELEC partition that we just created. Then navigate to the device trees folder, where you'll find a file called g12b s922x Ugoos am6b.dtb. A mouthful, I know. Copy it to the root folder as well and rename it to just dtb.img. And that's it, everything is now prepared and ready to go. Unplug the AM6B Plus first, then insert the microSD or USB stick, hold down the recovery button and plug the power cable back in. This should trigger the boot process that will launch the CoreELEC instance from our microSD card. And voila! Welcome to CoreELEC. Now, here's where the guide sort of ends, but I actually wanted to go a step further. You see, although you're running CoreELEC, it's not actually installed anywhere, it's still running off the microSD card, but you can actually move everything onto the onboard memory, and here's how. First, connect the AM6B Plus to the Wi-Fi and enable SSH, which you can find in Settings, CoreELEC, Services, and then SSH. Technically you don't have to go this route, but I find it much easier to do these kind of things from a more capable remote device. Once connected, run the command ceemmc-x. Answer a couple of questions like whether you want Android to stick around or not, and then wait until everything is moved. This, however, only covers the base CoreELEC instance. We actually have to move the Dolby Vision kernel file as well. You know, the dov.ko thing we moved into the root directory earlier. So while you're still connected via SSH, run the command mount-o rw, remount/flash. This will unlock the boot drive so we can modify it. Then the actual moving command, which is mv/storage/.config/dovi.ko/flash/. Once completed, turn off your box, remove your storage unit and restart. Alright, you're finished with the installation now. Unfortunately, you're nowhere near done with the actual setup. A lot of what follows next are configurations that heavily depend on your personal preferences. Meaning I won't guide you through everything, but I will highlight some of my basic settings, just as an example. First, let's check if Dolby Vision is actually installed correctly. For this, go into System, CoreELEC, Display, and make sure the setting Disable Dolby Vision is off. I don't know why this particular setting is a disable one instead of the other way around, but I digress. Then let's make sure that the audio pass-through is enabled as well. After all, these two settings is why we did the whole thing in the first place. You'll find it in System, Audio, and then Allow Pass-through. I don't know if the codec settings below matter anymore at this point, but I enabled all of them anyway, just in case. With these settings done, you'll have a basic configuration that should already be better than either the Apple TV or the Nvidia Shield. However, this is still just the tip of the iceberg. CoreELEC and Kodi have so many customization possibilities that you can essentially spend hours on end getting it just the way you like it. For example, for my media library, I finally switched over to Jellyfin, which is sitting on my TrueNAS system I set up a while ago. As for my theme, I went with Copacetic, which I like the absolute best as it looks very minimal and clean. I also set a global subtitle style along with the support for Japanese characters. Not because I can actually read Japanese, but because it sure as heck looks cool. The same goes for the show and movie logos it displays during the pause screen. I must admit, at first I was a bit hesitant to leave my trusty Apple TV that I have gotten so used to, but in the end I really liked this, to me, new look. It also had a side effect I wasn't expecting, that ended up increasing my watch time. Now, as you saw in the last chapter, the setup itself is fairly easy thanks to the hard work everyone at CoreELEC and beyond put into it. But the amount of time spent tweaking every little detail can take up quite a while. It did so for me. Yet, I'm sometimes still suffering from issues. For example, I had some HDMI handshake troubles every now and then, what with all the refresh rate and HDR switching. And the HDMI control or CEC wasn't working reliably all the time. Sometimes certain devices just wouldn't react to my presses on the remote, regardless of which one it was. Or the AM6B Plus wouldn't respond on its own because it was off, which forced me to lift my weary behind from the couch to manually smash that button. On the other hand, I do think, especially concerning audio, it was very well worth it. Unfortunately, I can't invite you to my humble abode to experience it yourself, but I was a little shocked to find that even movies without Atmos sounded noticeably better. Now take this with a grain of salt, my mind might just be playing tricks on me, trying to convince me of an improvement. But even after I forgot about it, as I continued to watch my regular shows, I caught myself saying, did it always sound this good? So I think yeah, it is actually better, much better. On the HDR side, or Dolby Vision Profile 7 FEL to be precise, the story is a bit more nuanced. I did a test by comparing one of the more notable movies when it comes to Dolby Vision Profile 7, Saving Private Ryan. I was genuinely curious whether I would spot a difference or not. I played back the first 10 minutes of the movie and set up my camera to record the results with the exact same settings, lens and position, and I couldn't believe the differences. On the left, you can see the movie being played back on the Apple TV through Infuse. On the right, you can see the Ugoos AM6B Plus running CoreELEC. Both use the same file, hosted on the same Jellyfin server. The difference is quite stark, and not only in color. On the Apple TV there is a noticeable flicker which I've actually read about, hence picking this movie to test it. Now, with such a big difference, why am I saying this is more nuanced? Well, it's because Saving Private Ryan is a bit of an extreme case. The actual number of Dolby Vision Profile 7 movies with full enhancement layers is limited. There's a handy list over on track.tv which collects all known Profile 7 FEL movies, but for a lot of cases it won't actually make that much of a difference if you're coming from something like an Nvidia Shield. For me, however, who's used to an Apple TV, I think I'm still benefiting from this upgrade, even if most of the movies I watch aren't of the highest level of quality. So I'm actually quite happy about the results, but there's a side effect that I mentioned which is a bit of a weird one, I must admit. Technically speaking, CoreELEC does have a YouTube add-on, but I never managed to get it working. So for me, the AM6B Plus remains a 100% local media player, meaning I can't endlessly browse around on YouTube, which turns out is a blessing in disguise. Not having YouTube, not having a streaming service with hundreds and thousands of choices forces me to stick to my own personally curated list, and I absolutely love this. Is this an additional selling point? Perhaps. It's an unexpected one for sure. I wasn't thinking about this when I began this journey, but then again, I'm not thinking that often to begin with. So, if you find yourself in a similar situation, but maybe with a different set of requirements, there are actually comparable devices out there these days that do almost the same thing as the Ugoos AM6B Plus. For example, the Zito Z9X Pro, or the UHD 8000, or the Dune HD Pro Vision 4K, the latter of which costs about the same as the Ugoos AM6B Plus. Now, I believe all of these will happily play back a Profile 7 file and apply the dynamic metadata, but not all of them actually decode the enhancement layer in full. The ones built on Realtek chips, for example, physically can't because they lack a second video decoder to handle that hidden 1080p stream. The Dune is a different story though. This box runs an AM Logic chip, the S905X4J, a close cousin to the S922XJ, the chip inside the AM6B Plus. And it turns out it's actually capable of decoding that second video layer, meaning if you install CoreELEC on it, you get the same results. You get the full enhancement layer. And that goes for Ugoos' own new boxes too. However, while making this, I stumbled on a great comparison video by H2Tweak, who put the newer Ugoos SK4 Pro and AM9 Pro up against the AM6B Plus. And wouldn't you know it, the AM6B Plus still reigns supreme. I highly encourage you to go watch the video in full, as it's very well worth it. Anyway, in the end, considering all features, it shows that the oldie is still the goldie. Like many gadget journeys I venture out on, this started with a simple Google search, Reddit posts, and a single recommendation of what I should buy. As usual, it turned out to be much more complex, but in the end, I'm glad I picked the Ugoos AM6B Plus, which is the last time I'm saying that name. The results are striking to me, and even though I have to revise my opening statement of the Ugoos AM6B Plus, oh crap, there it is again. Anyway, I have to revise my statement of it no longer being the only choice, but it seems to be still the most reliable one, even after all these years. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this little excursion into the living room was a fun one. I'm sticking around in this area for the next video too, and we'll go in depth into my new Do-It-All remote. Until then, it's good to see you. Bye.